are some healthy snack options?
Healthy snack options. I have kind of an interesting answer for this. I actually hate snacks. As a more reasonable answer, if you feel like you need a snack, I actually recommend having more substantial meals. So if you look for a reason to eat between meals just because you feel like eating, which I mostly define as snacking, that it leads to other problems overall. And so I actually have the recommendation that you have more substantial meals. You feel like you go too long between meals that you would want something between them, then I make the recommendation of putting your meals closer together and or making the previous meals large enough that they do end up carrying you, or having an actual meal in between of higher density foods if you have logistical problems like work or etc. So I have the answer of really just foregoing snacks entirely and having larger, more substantial, balanced meals instead. If you tell yourself that you do need a snack, it might indicate that you could improve your meal patterns and meal composition.
So snacks to you are less of a nutritional issue and more of a behavioral one.
Yes, I do consider snacking or grazing or whatever more of a behavioral issue than a nutritional one from a nutrition standpoint, and then one ends up leading to the other as far as things like energy balance. So I think having regular meal patterns, I have this variety of foods in regular amounts at regular times, that the snacking will end up going down on its own. And a vast majority of the time, snacking happens, in my opinion, because you get cued to snack more than any sort of requirement to eat exists, in which case you can check and see, oh, I feel like snacking, but I actually have my next meal coming up in about an hour and I can survive that. And then really over a few days or a week, your body will end up adjusting just fine.
Could you ever make a nutritional argument for snacking between meals?
Absolutely, I could make an argument for it. I would say people that have had bariatric surgery, for instance, I think in general they would have smaller, more frequent meals to account for the changes in their organs. In certain situations where somebody might snack, they might snack because they have issues, maybe long spans of time they might work before they can like take a break and have a sit-down proper meal. And in that case, I would actually suggest just having a high density meal instead of snacking. Plenty of options you can have to get a lot of nutrition and a lot of energy in a small amount of space. So where you would have snacked, maybe you would actually just have a meal there instead, and then your overall meal patterns end up changing a little bit. So I love to ask the question of, well, where does the snack, like why do you snack? And if you have a nutrition requirement, well then I suggest arranging your meals to facilitate it, having larger meals or spacing your meals differently, or changing the composition of your meals to keep you fuller for longer. Or you might also consider intra-workout nutrition a form of snacking maybe, or like if you go on a 3-hour long run, maybe some calories during that would make sense. And so if you want to consider that snacking, I can make the argument there as well. Otherwise, I see this as like, what does snacking really mean? Snacking tends to be like, I feel like a little something.
I'm craving cheese right now.
And to me, that sounds like something worth addressing as far as your overall meal patterns and eating behaviors.
So if I was going to address snacking in my behaviors, as far as instituting weight loss like what we talked about earlier, I would address that as meal timings and look at snacking as a sense of boredom.
It pays to ask and answer the question, what problem does snacking solve? And really take an honest jab. Give it the old college try of answering the question of what problem does snacking solve? Does it solve a problem? And can you solve that problem by arranging when you eat your meals and or making your meals more substantial? And if so, well then that solves the problem rather than the snacking. Going back to the question of what does snacking mean and what problem does it solve? And that will give you a great idea of how to go about managing snacking as a behavior rather than as a food to eat.
What would your definition of a snack be so someone could start looking for that behavior?
I would take the idiosyncratic approach of a person like whatever they define as snacks. So to me, some categories of food exist called snack foods, which might mean highly processed or small portions or whatever. I consider that secondary to what you actually consider snacking and what problem that solves. For a lot of people, it turns into, well, I eat because I feel like it, which if you eat because you feel like it, well, then you can actually arrange your meal patterns so that when you feel like eating, it lands on a meal time, and or it carries you to the next meal, which I think amounts to the more adult way to describe snacking, like just a little something I have to carry me to lunch, in which case I would say have a more substantial breakfast, or have that as your meal instead. I like to define snacking as the behavior rather than the types of foods that you eat, because some people might snack on cheese sticks. Some people might snack by, for instance, they might call it grazing. Like maybe I got a sub sandwich and I just kind of gnaw on it all day. And some people might call that snacking. Some people might call it grazing. It basically just confuses, in my opinion, how I end up describing and explaining the sort of meal patterns and nutrition behaviors I have, where if you have 3 meals and 2 snacks, I would just call that 5 meals. And in a situation like that, a snack typically means a smaller meal, in which case I would just call it a meal. Again, look at the behavior of snacking and what it means to you. And then again, like, what does healthy and unhealthy mean? You can do a similar sort of comparison of what does snacking mean and what sort of foods do I associate with that behavior and what problem does it solve? And I think you might learn a whole lot about yourself pretty fast.